You guys ready to finish strong? Yes. All right, let's do this. I want to zoom out and talk about this word, innovation. Now, this is a word that's used a lot. And I imagine if I had to channel the dialogue that went on in corporations around the world around innovation, it would be something like this. Have you heard of innovation? Absolutely. Is it a top priority for your company? Definitely. Do we want to be more innovative? Yes, please. Okay, so what's innovation? I have no idea. So innovation is kind of a squishy word. And I thought a lot about what is innovation. And I thought this would be a good time to invite some audience interaction. So what I would like is to have a few volunteers in the audience to, well, all of you think about the word innovation and what is the first example that comes to mind? Just the first example. And if you could share in one word, one or two words, what is an example of innovation that comes to mind, please share it with the audience and give me an opportunity to throw this into the crowd. Okay. Not quite far enough. Okay.
This thing that you just threw at me.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Okay, who else wants to share? Okay, we've got someone over here. Oh.
Blue Ocean.
What's that?
Blue Ocean.
Okay, Blue Ocean, great. Anybody else? Think of a product or service that comes to mind.
Just doing things better.
Doing things better. Okay. Let's toss that towards the front. Okay. Nobody was injured on my watch. Thank you. All right. So I did this exercise. I try to think about what are some things that come to mind when I think of the word innovation. The first thing I thought about is the moon landing, kind of the ultimate innovation, one of the biggest achievements in human history. Then I think, whenever I think innovation, I always think Apple, so I thought about the first Mac. For some reason, this popped into my head. This is an electric toothbrush. I think it popped into my head because I just bought one for my 9-year-old son, and I'm teaching him how to use it. And I actually thought of another innovation, which was our first suggestion. And this is an innovation. It's a modest innovation, but it is an innovation because it is probably faster than people running around with microphones. And it's more fun to throw things around than maybe be a little bit more tame. So I think that's an innovation also. The thing about innovation, though, is that because it's so many things, it's hard to get your head around. And I think that causes a lot of confusion around this term, innovation. Now, I've been fortunate in my career to focus on innovation in a variety of contexts. I've done it as an engineer. I've done it in the business sector. I've done it as a designer. I've been able to do it in a lot of different industries. I've worked for industrial companies, consumer goods companies, in the agency world at IDEO, and most recently in the tech industry at Google. And I've been able to work on a lot of cool things, everything from robotics to consumer products to music, working with professional sports leagues, and most recently at Google within YouTube on video. So I've learned a lot about innovation, and I think one of the basic things I've learned, which is probably obvious in the exercise we just did, is that innovation is many things, not one thing. And so there are lots of frameworks out there that try to describe the different types of innovation, and I've seen many of them. And there's some good ones, but I was never able to find one that really dialed in what I was seeing at Google and seeing in my career. So I want to share with you the way I think about innovation. It's a pretty simple framework. It's 3 kinds of innovation: versioning, visioning, and venturing. They all start with V and they all end in ing, and they rhyme. But these are 3 kinds of innovation that I want to talk to you about. And I'll use some examples at Google. So versioning, what is versioning? Well, versioning actually is a lot of what we've talked about the last couple days here. It's the small improvements that we can make to a product, things like micro-optimizations, usability improvements, aesthetic improvements, and making many, many, many small improvements over time, which can be really powerful. And here's an example of maybe the most extreme example of versioning at YouTube are our thumbnail sizes. So these thumbnails that you see on YouTube, they are, over time, we've really optimized what is the right size of thumbnail. We've dialed that in to get the right level of engagement. Make the thumbnail too big or too small. and engagement is lowered. So that's an extreme example of many, many things that we've done over the years in this area of versioning. And if you look at YouTube 5, 6 years ago, the product is dramatically different as a result of all these small improvements that we've made over time. So this is a very, very important part of innovation. And again, it's something that we spent a lot of time on in the last couple days. Now, this second type is called visioning. And visioning is really about taking bigger leaps than we might take in versioning. So these are things like major new feature. Maybe it's a major redesign of a product, which sometimes you have to do because times change, the market changes, our user needs change. And so sometimes we have to do these major redesigns, or sometimes it's just a brand new product that we're going to build and launch. So an example of this is at YouTube is YouTube Music. So YouTube Music is a separate app, separate from our main app. It's an experience that is completely focused on the music consumption experience. It's listening first, so very different than YouTube, and it's a paid product. So this was a big deal. This took many years to work on and get right, and this is an example of a major leap that we made in YouTube to build and launch this completely new product. Now there's a third type of innovation called venturing, and the examples I'll give here are things like completely new ventures, advanced R&D, moonshot projects. Now, not many companies can afford to invest in here. Fortunately, at Google, we can invest in here, and so we do things like this. If you're familiar with Project Loon, so this is a gigantic balloon that holds technology that brings internet access to remote parts of the world. And that's what some of our venturing teams at Google work on. So these are these three types of innovation. They're all very important. All of them happen at Google. And when I joined Google 6 years ago and started at YouTube, I was curious. I'd read so much about Google being an innovative company. That's why I joined Google, because I focused on innovation. So I was really curious. What did this look like? What was the portfolio of innovation within Google? And so I was curious. And when I came in, I had already read a lot about the venturing side, Google X, moonshot projects, 10x thinking. These things that we were working on that would have just massive scale and massive impact. And the reason why I refer to these as external teams is because if you work at YouTube, Google X feels pretty external. It's in a different city. The building, I can't even get into the building. I don't have badge access to the building. Some of the projects are secretive. What they work on doesn't really impact me in YouTube, really. But they're very important for Google to be pushing the limits and creating completely new businesses and new industries. And so when I joined, I saw, as I was inside the company, that yes, Google is very good at venturing. Everything I'd read about was true. And the thing maybe that I didn't expect was that Google, once I was inside, was also good at the opposite type of innovation. Google is very good at versioning. So what I saw when I got there was lots of work on tiny improvements, but also seeing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of launches stacked up over time to make pretty big changes in the products. So I call that 1% improvement type work, or versioning. And so I saw this company that was really good at venturing, really good at versioning. That's a pretty big gap between a 1% improvement and a 10x improvement. So what about the middle? And my observation and my feeling when I joined was that this sort of felt like a neglected area. And I think the reason was we didn't really seem to have an explicit strategy for how to deliver on that kind of innovation within Google. I think the way we did it, maybe like a less explicit strategy, was just to have our product teams who are doing all that versioning, all that 1% improvement work, to also be responsible for visioning. So we were kind of asking our teams to do both, which is a tough ask. And one of the biggest reasons that this is a tough ask is that teams are just too busy doing versioning. When you have an app with 1 billion users, there is a lot of versioning to do. And so there's not a lot of time left to do the bigger leaps. And you can see here, this is a quote from an internal survey. This is a statement: I spend the right amount of time working on product vision. Do you agree or disagree? And this is a survey of all of our product managers at Google. You can see that's a pretty high number of people who disagree or feel ambivalent about the time that they're spending on product vision. And here's a a quote from a product management director: "We're empowered to think big and question long-held assumptions. We just don't have the bandwidth." I'm curious in the audience how many folks would raise their hand and have similar sentiments to what we're seeing here. Raise your hand if you feel like you're too busy to spend the right amount of time on product vision. Yeah, so that's a real thing. The other thing that's probably deeper is that each of these types of innovation, they require different mindsets, different processes, different approaches. They're different from one another. So in versioning, you're thinking 6 months out, you're thinking small improvements, you're valuing speed, let's get to market quickly and experiment. Visioning is very different. We're thinking 2 to 3 years out. We're not thinking about improvements, we're thinking about advancements. We're not really optimizing for speed, we're optimizing for what's a leap in value that we can create for our users. And then venturing is even more different. That's 5 to 10 years out, inventions, breakthroughs. And so these all require different mindsets, different approaches. And so I think it's very challenging to ask a team that's really optimized around one mindset to then shift into a second mindset and do both at the same time. So I want to describe to you what visioning can feel like when you're in a culture of versioning. Oh, sorry. Lost my train of thought. So that was a very painful 8 to 10 seconds there. I didn't know if I had the guts to not say anything for 10 seconds on stage. I don't know if it was uncomfortable or awkward for you, but the metaphor here is that when you're in a culture that values continuous activity, moving fast, doing things, and then you want to slow down and take the time to really think about a bigger leap, it can feel excruciating in that environment. It can feel like, why have we slowed down? What happened to all the progress? And so that acclimation we get to speed and always acting can be really challenging in a versioning culture and can make it hard to do visioning. Here's a recent example of this. A few years ago, we identified a need that our creators had on our platform, which was they wanted to use YouTube, use their platform to raise money for causes that they cared about. And so we had a versioning mindset. And so the versioning mindset is, what's the quickest way we can get this capability out the door? What's the most feasible solution? What's the quickest solution? Let's make an improvement to our product and move quickly. And that's not a bad thing. We wanted to get this capability to our creators as quickly as possible. They want to raise money for causes they care about. And so what we did in true versioning mindset is we identified a capability we already had on the platform called information cards. That's what this little eye is. So we already had this on the platform. When you tap that eye, you get additional information about the video. So for example, if you were a creator and you had a cooking video, if I tapped on that as a viewer, I might get the recipe and get ingredients. So we thought, why don't we just add donations as a type of information card? We can get this out the door quickly, and that's what we want to do, get things out the door quickly. So we did that. We launched relatively quickly. But the whole goal of this was to help our creators raise money. And after we launched, for a pretty long time, we had pretty underwhelming results. And one of the main reasons was people did not notice that eye and had no idea this was a fundraising video, that you could donate money when watching this video. So the team had to go back to the drawing board after those underwhelming results, and they took more of a visioning mindset. They spent time understanding what are the needs of our viewers, what are the needs of our creators, what's the ideal experience to make, what's the bigger leap we can make, not just what's the most feasible. And so at the end of last year, we launched a new solution that is a bigger leap. There's a very prominent donate button. I can see who the nonprofit is. I can see how much money has been raised, how much time is left. I can learn more about the fundraiser, and there are many other features in this experience that make it a really good experience. And since we launched at the end of last year, these are the results in money raised so far. These are still early days. And so this is a good comparison between the versioning mindset and the visioning mindset and what a leap looks like compared to a small improvement. I think the challenge, though, is that in a culture of versioning, this took a lot longer to get to success than it probably should have taken. So when I joined, and what I saw in those first few years is that we had a gap in our portfolio. We had this visioning gap. And what I wanted to do and what I was able to do within YouTube is create a team called the visioning team to play a role in helping the company do this type of innovation that I felt was missing. Let's talk a little bit about my team. So our team mission is we want to help YouTube explore new terrain and make bigger leaps. That's our mission statement. Here's a picture of our team at an offsite last December. We took a class on street art. I will say we had a lot of help from the instructor to make it look that good, but we did get to spray some colors on the canvas. And we chose the words new terrain because that's kind of what we do. Now, when we started out, this picture would have just been me standing there. I was the lone visioner. I was hired without a job description, and this is what I started doing at YouTube. And for a while, nobody was asking for visioning. No one used that word. But over time, I was able to prove the value of this different type of innovation, and then I was given resources to hire more people, and now our team has grown to 6 people over the years. And the way our team works is when we work on a visioning project, we create this pod, this pairing of a researcher and a designer. And the reason why we have this pairing, why it's so important, is each of them play a critical role in the visioning process. The researcher is there because they are really good at understanding unmet needs. And so everything we do has to be based on user needs and unmet needs. And then our designer is there to translate the insights into tangible ideas, tangible solutions within the company. And the reason why they're so connected, the way we don't operate is sort of the handoff of a baton that you see in some companies where the researcher writes a report, or they do the research, then they write the report, then they email the report out. Designer reads the report, designs on their own, and then they send their design to engineering. We don't really operate that way. We don't feel like in strategic work that's helpful. So this pairing is a very close pairing. The designer's heavily involved in research. The researcher is heavily involved in the design and the conceptualizing of new ideas. They both share the role of strategy, figuring out where we should be going. So that's kind of the nucleus of our visioning team. And so we're able to, with a larger team, we're able to work on multiple projects at the same time. Now, one of the things that we do that's a little bit unique with what you might have seen in other innovation teams or visioning teams is that many other teams, they kind of work in a silo. So they work over here, they come up with some cool ideas, and then they present them to the company, and they sell them, they pitch them. So we don't work that way. What we do is we partner with the cross-functional product team that we think will likely need to execute on this vision, because we want it to be their vision. So we work closely with them. Now, they don't have a lot of time. They're busy doing versioning. So we bring a lot of the bandwidth. But we do ask for some of their time. So they're on the journey with us. And by the end of the project, ideally, they feel like it's their vision, not ours. And then when that happens, then they start acting on that vision. And then we see something actually happen, which is the whole point of visioning. We also work a little bit differently. So we have our own project spaces. So this is a project space that we work in where we can put up everything we're learning, our ideas, have all the material out and be very available to work with together. So those are folks on my team. And then periodically we invite the cross-functional team in with us and work with us on the project. So that's kind of gives you a little bit of a visual of our space and how we work. So this approach that we've taken has been pretty impactful. So we've been doing this for over 6 years. We've worked on, well, now it's probably 20 or 21 projects. We've impacted 17 launches at YouTube, some big, some small. Some of the examples you might have heard of, so back in 2013, that was one of the first things I worked on, was the vision for YouTube Kids. Now this is a pretty successful separate app for us. We worked on something called the Community tab, which for those of you who might be YouTube fans, this is a place on YouTube where fans can interact with their creators in more of a social media type interaction where there's text and images being posted back and forth, which is really helpful to this community that we have on YouTube. We also worked on the vision for a new app that eventually was named YouTube Go. This is our version of YouTube in emerging markets. It's a very different type of YouTube experience designed for countries like India and Africa and East Asia. Now, a few years ago, we were starting to launch more experiences on YouTube that were paid experiences. And one of the things that we realized we needed to figure out was, what does support look like on a paid product? So Google has lots of support for free products, but the support should probably be at a higher level for a paid product. And so we worked on a vision for what does premium support look like, and now that's available on all of our paid products at YouTube. And finally, we worked on a vision a couple of years ago for news. What does news look like on YouTube? And one of the things that we worked on was this thing at the top called information panels. And these are very helpful to combat misinformation that can happen on these platforms, to connect the user to authoritative sources, especially when a story is still developing. And so all of these projects, what they have in common is they all started out with pretty open-ended questions. So YouTube Kids did not start out with, let's design a separate app for kids, go do it. It started out with, what's the opportunity for families? Very open-ended question. YouTube Go started out with, what should we be doing in emerging markets? Last year, we worked on a project where the question was, how might we support digital well-being? Very open-ended, nebulous question. And so when you're trying to start with something that's ambiguous and undefined and end with something that is clear, that can be a challenging journey. That's a journey of ambiguity where the terrain is unknown, the solution is unknown, and in many cases, the problem is unknown. What's digital well-being? We don't even know what that is, but that's what we need to figure out in the project. And so this is a tough journey, and while our projects are not paint by number, and no project is ever the same as another project, we have learned over the years that there are certain stages that we need to move through in order to navigate this ambiguity and get to a place where we do have a clear vision for the company to act on. And so what I want to do is walk you through each of these stages and give you examples from past projects of what that looks like. OK, phase one is called Activate the Team. And this is really about figuring out what is the right problem. Before we even start working on a visioning project, is this the right problem? Is this the right time to work on this visioning project? Are we working with the right people? And do we have the right plan for this project? And so I like this quote, every battle is won before it's ever fought, because this is really about setting this whole journey up for success. If we don't do this first phase well, we're unlikely to succeed no matter what we do in the rest of the journey. And so let's start with the right time. So I've done visioning too early. I'll call this someday visioning, where people were excited, we did this vision, and then nothing happened for 3 years. Too early. There was no readiness on the team. There was no team ready to inherit the vision. And so that was kind of a waste of time. And what I've also learned is that visions tend to get dusty when they sit around for 2 or 3 years, and they kind of lose their power. I've also had the unfortunate experience of doing emergency visioning. This is doing it too late. One time, there was a team working on a product that they were hoping to launch in a few months, and they came and said, we need help with the vision for this product. So that's sort of an experience of designing the airplane while it's in flight. That's a very challenging thing to do. And so what we look for is the right timing, opportunistic visioning. What's the right time where it's early enough to define what we're going to do, but we have a team ready to act on that vision. So timing is super important. Also, scope is super important. When we worked on that project that resulted in the community tab, it started out with a very small scope. And the question was, how do we improve engagement on our platform? And so a really focused scope was, let's improve comments on YouTube, which is a good challenge, but we felt it was too narrow. Then there was another scope which was way too broad, all forms of engagement. Let's look at all forms of engagement. Creator to fan engagement, fan to fan engagement, creator to creator engagement. That felt like it was boiling the ocean. So we picked a middle ground. Let's focus on creator to fan engagement. That was the right scope. And that resulted in the community tab. And then finally, the right team. So we work really hard to build the team that's going to work on this visioning project. So we start with our team. I already talked about this, a combination of research and design. We would never do a visioning project without one of those two capabilities. Then what we do is we build that cross-functional team that I talked about. And minimum, this is product management and UX. Often it's engineering. Sometimes it's marketing or people from other parts on the business side of the organization. Whoever feels critical to be a part of this vision, we want them to be involved, because otherwise we're going to have a vision without buy-in from a critical group in the company. So we pull this team together. And then we also define this outer ring of what I'll call stakeholders. So these are executive sponsors, contributors, but mainly the executive sponsors. Who are the executives that we want to have get their support on the projects, get their input on the projects, and help us make decisions along the way? And finally, the right plan. So no project is the same. So we have these cards. These are kind of like, it's a little toolkit we have where we can, for every project, we can map out the different things that we want to do in the project. And it's kind of an interactive experience. We can do it with our product team that we're working with, and we can map out the project that way. So the right time, the right scope, the right plan, the right team. OK, so that was activate the team. Now we have our team. Now the first thing we want to do is immerse in the problem space. This is really the most important phase, in my opinion, of the whole project, because it is really about getting the depth of insight that you need. You can't make a leap without insight. I love this quote. Some people dispute whether Einstein actually said this, but I love the quote nonetheless. And the quote is something to the effect of, if I had an hour to solve the problem of the world ending, I would spend 55 minutes defining the problem and 5 minutes solving it. So it really speaks to the importance of, you've got to understand the problem, and it can be very tempting to jump to solutions, especially in an incremental or a versioning mindset. We jump very quickly to solutions. And so one of the first things that we do on these projects is this idea of 360-degree immersion. So on the project for digital well-being last year, we started by talking to our users. This is very typical, right? Expected, talk to your users. And we talked to adults. We talked to college students. I guess they're adults, but sort of junior adults, teenagers. We talked to the parents of teenagers. So we tried to talk to a lot of different users. But that was only one part of this 360-degree immersion. We also talked to experts on digital well-being, clinicians who are seeing people coming into their offices who are having challenges, critics of the tech industry, looking at global trends. What's going on in Korea? What's going on in Japan? What's going on in Europe around this topic of digital well-being? Looking at scientific research on this topic, looking at our logs data and our survey data internally. So this 360-degree immersion, you need to do this when you're exploring new terrain. Now, another thing that's really important is this idea of in-context observation. So when we worked on the vision for YouTube Go, our product for the next billion users in emerging markets, you can't design for and think of a leap for those markets without going there. You can't sit in the conference room and do that. And so our team spent a lot of time in these markets. When we first started working on that project, this was a few years ago, Facebook had launched a product called Facebook Lite for emerging markets. And it was basically a faster loading version of Facebook. And our team said, well, that's a good idea. We should do that for YouTube. And so at first, that was what we wanted to do was, or the team wanted to do, was load a faster version of YouTube. And that's a good example, again, of a versioning mindset, which is we tend to devalue the understanding the problem deeply. We kind of go with more, shall I say, surface level insight. So that was a good insight. You need a faster loading app in these markets that have poor connectivity and costly connectivity, but that's not really the whole story. And so by spending a lot of time in these markets, we were able to understand much more deeply how these cultures are different. And that resulted in a version of YouTube that's very different than what it might look like in the developed world. The last example I'll give is something called analogous inspiration. It's a different kind of learning than the other two. So when we were working on YouTube Kids, one of the topics that came up was creativity. How do we inspire creativity in kids on our platform? We want them to be creative, not just passively consume. And so we thought about how do we learn about creativity? How can we get inspired about creativity? And so we went on these field trips throughout San Francisco to different places where we thought we could learn about creativity. And so I went with a group of people to this museum called the Creativity Museum. And it's a place where children go, and there's a lot of interactive exhibits, and the whole mission of this museum is to help kids be more creative. And so we sat down and we interviewed the director. We learned a lot from her, and then we got to try out some of the installations. And one of them was this place where we could, in 1 hour, 1.5 hours, make a stop-motion claymation movie. And one of the insights we got from that experience was when we started, we had this blank sheet of paper, and we're supposed to come up with the story. And that's not easy to do. That's kind of like blank sheet of paper syndrome. Anyone who knows creative work knows that. Sometimes you just get a block, and it's hard to generate creativity on command. So what this museum does very well is they put in structure to spark creativity. And so they had this deck of cards that you could pick out some cards, and that's how you would come up with your story. And so we picked a card that said monsters. We picked another card that said outer space. We picked another card that said ice cream social. And so that was what our story was going to be about, a bunch of monsters on a planet in outer space having an ice cream party. So that's an example of sparking creativity through structure. And there are many other things they did. But we never would have learned these things just by doing the traditional ways of understanding and doing research. This is thinking outside of your industry and asking yourself, what is the topic we're trying to learn about, which in this case was creativity. Okay, so we activated the team. We immersed in the problem space. The next phase is called Frame the Opportunity. And this is really about translating insights into strategic opportunities. And how this is different than maybe the versioning mindset. What often happens in versioning is something is learned, and then it's immediately translated into an idea, and then we start building the idea, and we try to launch the idea. And I love this quote, "Rowing harder doesn't help if the boat is headed in the wrong direction." So what we try to do in this phase is translate well, first we try to make sense of everything we've learned. That's a lot of things we're learning. Let's make sense of it, and then how do we identify what the more strategic opportunities are, the more strategic directions, before we get into concrete ideas. So here's an example from a few years ago. We were doing a project on social. Of course, our first question was, what does social mean? So we created this map of the social video landscape, and it had different dimensions: creating, conversing, contributing, consuming, doing it alone, doing it with a small group, doing it with everybody. So we created this framework, and this was very helpful for us and our team to just get our head around what does the social video landscape even look like, and then where should we focus. Here's another one. We were exploring interests a few years ago. So if you have an interest in motorsports, how can we do a good job on YouTube of supporting your interest? And so this was, again, a framework around interest because, well, what are interests? There are lots of different kinds of interests. So there are short-term interests, there are long-term interests. There are light interests, and there are deep interests. And so we're able to use this framework to identify different kinds of interests, and then, again, help the team focus on what kind of interests are we trying to create a vision for. And then lastly, this is a journey framework. So we were working on a project for learning. YouTube is a really powerful platform for learning. And one of the things that we were working on was, how do we help YouTube become a catalyst for employment? How do we help someone who is looking to increase their skills and get a job, explore a career change? And so this is really a journey of saying, how do people get from this first moment of recognizing the potential for a career change all the way to starting on their first day of a new job. Okay, so that's what Frame is all about. Now this is where things start to get interesting. Now that we know the directions that we want to explore, let's explore those possibilities. And so that's what we're doing. We're exploring and validating a wide range of solutions. This might be my favorite quote out of all of them. This is from I believe, a French philosopher. Nothing is more dangerous than an idea when it is the only one you have. So again, in the versioning mindset, what you see a lot is we learn something, translate it quickly to an idea. Let's go with the first idea we have. It's pretty good. We're smart people, and we are. We have a lot of smart people, and so this is a good idea. Just run with it. But what we do on our projects is we don't go with the first idea. We explore a lot of ideas. So I'll give you an example from the fan engagement project that I told you about. It started out with an initial idea. The team was excited about that. But again, we said we're doing visioning, not versioning. So let's explore a lot of ideas. So we generated over 500 ideas with the team. We identified a smaller set of ideas that we thought were promising, and we kind of prototyped them out in video form, like a little bit, almost like an advertisement for the idea. And then that resulted in this final concept that became the community tab. And because of this divergent thinking to try out a lot of ideas and not converge on one idea right away, you increase your chances of having the best idea. But there's another underrated benefit of this too, which is the team is more confident in this idea having gone through this process. What you'll see a lot when you don't follow this divergent thinking is, let's say you go with your initial idea and then the product team starts working on that, and a year and a half into development, people start questioning, why are we doing this? And why did we, someone else had this other cool idea, maybe we should be doing that. Why are we doing this one? And so this process really got the team bought in, and there was no second guessing of this direction. Everybody understood how we got here. Even if they didn't agree with it, they understood how we got here, which is very important. Because a vision should align and clarify. The other important thing is the idea of failing fast and failing cheaply. So when we were working on this vision for emerging markets, the team had an idea that we're really excited about. So in these markets, connectivity is poor, connectivity is costly. Video is really heavy in these markets. Video is problematic in these markets. And so the team had this idea of creating a new format, which would be still images with audio over the still images. And they thought, if we can get creators to create this new format, this is going to be a lot easier, faster, and more affordable for our users to consume in these emerging markets. So they were really excited about this idea. When we went out to these markets in this phase, we tested a lot of ideas, and we tested them cheaply. So you see this piece of paper here, we called it the scroll. It's just a lot of ideas. You unroll the scroll and show it to people and get feedback. So when we showed them this idea about this new form of media, this is what we heard. Just because I have less data does not mean I want a bad experience. Video is video. So this was kind of humbling to the team, because you could tell that it was almost like semi-insulting to share this idea, which was like, hey, we're going to give you guys a substandard experience because you have poor connectivity. And that did not resonate with our users. The cool thing about this, though, is yes, it's a little bit deflating when you put your idea in front of somebody and you find out it's not a good idea and you were excited about it. But think about the time this saved our team. If we hadn't done this, and in a versioning mindset, you probably wouldn't do this. You would say, we've got a good idea, let's get it to market as quickly as possible. What we would have done is we would have worked on it for a while. Then we would have asked our creators to create this content in this new format. Then we would have launched it, and we would have watched and done analytics and measured, just like the donations. And then eventually we would say, something's not working. And then we'd dig into it more, and then we'd find out people don't like this, don't want this. Video is video. So that's a very long, painful, and expensive way to learn. This is a very fast and cheap way to learn. So we do this as much as possible. We want to iterate out failure as much as possible in, are the ideas that we're working on, do they really create value for users? And like I said, we do this in low fidelity. That's how you do it. You can do a lot of things. You don't have to build expensive things necessarily to get very quick feedback on whether something is useful or valuable or not. Okay, we've activated the team. We immersed in the problem space. We framed the opportunity. We explored the possibilities. We know what ideas are working, what ideas are not working. So now it comes to this fifth phase, defining the vision. And so this is really about bringing everything together, developing a focused, cohesive, tangible vision for 2 to 3 years out. So that's the thing in visioning again. We're trying to think 2 to 3 years out. It doesn't mean we'll wait 3 years to do something, but it means we want to work to something bigger. And I love this quote, the sun's rays do not burn until brought to a focus. So this vision needs to be focused. I think the word visioning can kind of conjure up unconstrained brainstorming, lots of wild ideas. Well, that's not what we want. We want a clear vision, something that people can look at and say, I understand where we're heading. I understand what we're trying to build 2 to 3 years from now. And so these are the layers of the vision that we typically work on, starting with the value proposition, product pillars, signature concepts, and all the supporting insights. So I'll give you an example of what these things mean, and I'll use YouTube Go for emerging markets as an example of this. Value proposition. You should be able to summarize very succinctly what is the benefit of your product. And the benefit of this product was a more accessible, affordable, and relevant YouTube in these markets. And these were our product pillars. You could view product pillars as what are the most important things that we need to focus on as a team. You can view them as key benefits, but they were cost, connectivity, social, and relevance. We need a product that is respectful of cost, helps people consume YouTube in an affordable manner. It needs to work when connectivity is not great or even no connectivity. It needs to be inherently social, and it needs to be relevant to the part of the world I live in. So those were our product pillars. And then we developed what we call signature concepts. And the reason why we use the term signature concepts is in our visioning work, we don't want to give out a list of 300 ideas. That doesn't create focus. What we want to do is pick a few big ideas that are going to take years to build out and focus on those bigger ideas. And we also don't want to just think about ideas that would fall under the user experience. Anything can be a big idea. It can be something about how the algorithm works. It can be a content strategy. It can be a lot of different things. It could be a new business model. The point is we try to define this vision with a handful of signature concepts that we're going to put on our roadmap. Okay, the last phase, inspire action. This is where the rubber hits the road. This is about translating the vision into concrete action inside the organization. And this quote says it all. Vision without action is daydreaming. Vision with action can change the world. And so we don't want to be the daydreaming team. Because if we were the daydreaming team, I wouldn't be here talking to you. I would have another job at Google. Because Google is not going to fund a team of 6 people just to daydream. We want action. We want to do things in the world. We want to help our users, do good things for our users. And so none of this matters if we don't get things to get built and launched and given to our users. And so one of the ways to do this is something called a product story. So when we were working on the vision for YouTube Kids, I noticed that the product managers were having a hard time explaining this idea internally. They were trying to evangelize this idea internally. And they were doing it the usual way with slides and bullet points and feature lists. And so we made a short video. It was only 2 or 3 minutes long, but it sort of imagined what this future product would look like. And it was not a flashy video. In fact, it was still images with audio. I'm the one who took the pictures. It was my voiceover. I took photographs of my wife and my kids holding tablets. So it was low production, but it was really powerful. When we showed it, the reactions we got were things like, I get it, or it's like seeing the ad for the product 2 years before we even built it. And so storytelling is a great way to convey your vision. And it became a critical tool to evangelize YouTube Kids both internally and externally with our partners. Now, the other way to get traction is, yes, we're going to define this long-term vision with a product story or other things, but what's really important is to create a bridge there. Create some sort of a high-level roadmap of how we get there, and most importantly, we're learning in the last few years, it's really important for our team to help the product team define V1, because we're an action-oriented company at Google. So the first thing they're going to say is, okay, what are we working on first? And so the more we can define this, the more we create momentum towards the longer-term vision. And then all this that we focused on in the very first phase, this building of the team, this creates the alignment and buy-in that you need at the end of the project. Again, we want the cross-functional team to feel like this is their vision, not our vision. So when they start talking about the vision as theirs and they start presenting the vision, then we know we've done our job and we have a good chance at traction. So that's the visioning journey in summary. You can see I put an estimated or really a minimum number of weeks across these different phases. And if you do the math, that comes out to 3 months. So that time can go pretty quick. And that's why when we work on projects, they are really a minimum of 3 months. If you can imagine if someone asked, well, let's do a visioning project in a month, you would have to either cut out a lot of these things or go very quickly through these things and probably not maybe do what we want to be doing in each of these phases. So our projects are 3 months long, 4 months long. Sometimes they're 6 months long if it's a really big area, whatever it takes. to get the job done. So I want to summarize just a few things that we've learned in the 6 years doing this thing called visioning within YouTube and having a visioning team. The first one is to set the bar high for visioning. I've seen a lot of teams, whether you call them visioning teams or innovation teams, I've seen many of them come and go in my career, and I've seen it at Google as well. And I think one of the reasons is they don't set the bar high enough for visioning. And I'll start with setting the bar high for success. What I see a lot of innovation teams do is they define their success as soft impact. We want to push the company's thinking. We want to experiment and fail. We want to change the culture. That's a lot of good stuff, but it's soft impact. And when I started this team, especially because no one was asking for this, I knew that the only way this was going to succeed is if we were having hard impact. And so I remember a meeting I had with our SVP of product. So he's in charge of all of product at YouTube. He met me to talk about my team, and the very first question he asked me was, how do you define success? And so I told him, we want to see things launch. And I put the asterisk there because not just any launch, a successful launch. So we want to see things launched that are successful, and we want to have had a big influence. So in other words, if we work on a visioning project, and then later we see that vision launched and launched well, doing well in the marketplace, and people on that team say, yes, this visioning effort was critical to getting this product defined and out the door, then that's success for us. That's a very high bar for success. We also have a high bar for what we work on. Priority. Over the years, I've had lots of people ask for help on visioning, many, many requests. And we have to say no to 90% of the requests because we have a really high bar for what we work on. We want to work ideally on the top priorities of the company. CEO level problems, SVP level problems, really important problems. That's what we try to do, and we've been doing that increasingly over the years. Second is we want to work on projects that are a good fit for us, where we think there's at least a chance of succeeding. And then the last one is readiness. We want to feel like there's a team ready to act on the vision. If someone asks me, no matter how important they are, no matter how important a problem is, if they want us to work on a visioning project, but I don't see a team that would be ready or a champion that would be ready to act on that vision, that's a sign that we're not going to be very successful. So we have a high bar on what we work on. Then the last bar we set pretty high is a commitment to quality. So early on when I was doing this work, this is what I heard a lot. What can you do in 1 week? So that's the versioning mindset. What can you do in 1 week? Well, I think we need to spend at least 3 months on this. Well, we don't have 3 months. We have 1 week. What can you do in 1 week? So I heard this over and over to the point where I started to question whether what I was doing was really going to be helpful. I'm trying to sell X, and they're asking for Y. And ultimately, I stuck to my guns because if we started doing these 1 week projects, then we're really just a glorified versioning team. So we stuck to our guns. We were committed to quality. And we're committed to visioning. And now, when we say 3 months, teams are like, OK, that's what I've heard, and that's what it's going to take to get the job done. Let's do that. OK, number 2, treat visioning like a craft. I would say that this type of work right now is viewed as, visioning is viewed as a soft skill, or it's viewed as a recipe. It's not really viewed as a craft or a discipline. And so at Google, we have interaction designers, we have visual designers, and the designer on our team, we try to think of them as a specialist in visioning, design strategist, whatever you want to call it. But they have a full-time job on doing visioning. And similarly, we have qualitative researchers at Google. We have quantitative researchers at Google. The researchers on our team, we view them as research strategists. And again, that's a full-time role. So that's where we're going on our team, is that we really believe visioning is a craft, not just a soft skill or a recipe. And like anything, the more you invest in skill set, find people with the right mindset, invest in experience, the better the work is going to be. And so we look for certain skills, depth of craft. So of course we want our researchers and our designers to be really good at what they're doing, but we also want to have T-shaped people. I don't know if you've heard of the concept of T-shaped people, but This part of the T is depth. So again, you're a really good researcher, you're a really good designer, but then you have this breadth. You're good at other things. You're interested in other things. So maybe you're a designer who's really good at design, but you're interested in research. You're good at research. You're good at prototyping. Maybe you're a researcher who's great at research, but you also have an MBA and you're interested in business models. So we look for T-shaped people. And then we look for people with this visioning mindset. The most important thing is the ability to embrace ambiguity, not tolerate ambiguity, embrace ambiguity. Because visioning is all about creating clarity for others. And what I've learned in doing this is there are a lot of people who that's not really their cup of tea. They would like someone else to create more of the focus for them. And then when given that focus, they can do a great job. But being in that ambiguous space and trying to create the clarity out of fuzziness or just a mess is not really very comfortable for them. And so on our team, we need people who are really good at embracing ambiguity. They want to create clarity for other people. They're curious and they're leaders. These are all important attributes because this process is not easy and change is not easy. And so you need a lot of leadership to get a team from point A to point B and to make that leap. And then finally, experience. The more you do something, the better you are. So we have over 30 years of experience on our team doing this kind of work. And that experience is really beneficial when you hit tough spots in these projects, which you will always hit, and you can rely on your experience to know what to do. Okay, number 3, this is the last takeaway, which is to have our heads in the cloud but our feet on the ground. And so at the most fundamental level, it's about, yes, we want to be unconstrained. We're trying to think big. We're trying to make big leaps. But we also need to be constrained as well. We need to have our feet on the ground too. Otherwise, nothing will happen. We need to focus on desirability. Let's make something that our users will love, that will create value for our users. But it also needs to be feasible too. And we want to be really ambitious. We're trying to make a big leap, right? Ambition is important, but fruition is important too. If we're too ambitious and it can't be done, or it's too much of a leap for our team or our company, nothing will happen. And so we're really striking a fine balance between these, between head in the clouds and feet on the ground. And again, in a lot of innovation teams I've seen is they tend to over-index too much on the top. They're kind of the blue sky team. And so they are very ambitious, very unconstrained, but they don't have a lot of impact. So we're really trying to strike this middle balance. And one of the ways we do that, striking this middle balance, is to partner, again, like I said before, partner closely with product teams. So we're going to bring the bandwidth to really focus on visioning, but they're going to play an ownership role. They're going to be the owners of all the major decisions we make along the way. We're going to be the team that can be unconstrained, but they're going to help bring constraints to us, help us understand what the constraints are. And that'll be a healthy tension between our teams. We're going to bring a fresh perspective, which is needed, but they're going to bring the domain knowledge, which is also needed. So this partnership is really important to find that middle ground between the clouds and feet on the ground. And so through all this work, we've started to emerge as a force within YouTube and help the company take these bigger leaps. And what we've also seen recently over the last couple of years is more and more visioning teams are bubbling up around Google and filling this middle area of our innovation portfolio, which is great. So I just want to conclude with 3 final thoughts on visioning. The first one is that visioning requires a leap of faith. You have to believe in the possibility of creating something new. You have to believe that you can make something better or significantly better. And so there is an inherent optimism in visioning that you need to have. Second one is that visioning challenges us to be better. And that's why I think it's so important that we add this visioning mindset into our organizations. Because this desire to do more, to be better, we need that. Because it's easy to stick with the status quo. It's easy to just spend our time on incremental improvements. It's safe, it's familiar, it feels really good to get those small wins. And it's really important. But we can do better, and we need to do better. We need to go further. The last one is about potential. And I think that versioning And a lot of the things that we talked about in this conference are really, really, really important. It's a very important part of innovation. Every company needs it. And so we need to value that and honor that. But versioning, it really optimizes our potential. But if we want to unlock or unleash our potential in our companies, in our products, in our teams, and if we want to unlock the potential in ourselves even, we need to make bigger leaps. And that is what visioning is all about. Thank you.
That's good.